What's up, undead out there? This is Stephen and Ben bringing you another Phantology episode. Once again, we are bringing you a Dresden Files episode. It feels like this is the new norm for Phantology, but this is book 13 out of the 16 that have been released thus far. So we may be moving off Dresden Files pretty soon, although we'll probably have to do some entire series episodes. So what's up, Ben? How was Ghost Story by Jim Butcher? How was Ghost Story number 13 for you?
Yeah, Ghost Story was great. Although you talking about those, like how far we are along in the book series, it's giving me some pre-book finishing blues. You know, that phenomenon that we talk about. Yeah.
The book series depression for sure.
Right. I don't know what I'm gonna finish, what I'm gonna start after I finish. You know, it's sad.
I mean, the good news is you're still a few months away, probably at least 1 month away, depending on how fast you finish the last three. We have Battleground coming out towards the end of September, so maybe you don't need to go into the hole of depression quite yet.
Yeah, maybe not, but I'm already halfway through. Oh, what comes after Ghost Story? Because I finished Ghost Story and then
Cold Days is after.
Yeah, so I'm halfway through that, and so I feel like I'm making good time on these. So
yeah. Okay, so it sounds like you're fully invested in the Dresden Files now. I know originally it took you quite a bit to kind of get up to speed, and for those first-time listeners out there, Dresden is a series that I have read all the way through. Ben's going through the first time, so we're getting his little more raw reactions and theories, maybe, since there are still a couple more books that you're not current with. But interesting that you say that you liked Ghost Story a lot, because this is a pretty controversial book in the fandom. A lot of people do not like Ghost Story, actually.
Yeah, to me, it almost seemed like it was just a way to show how far back the characters had gone after changes. It was almost, I considered it almost like a short story after changes. I don't know, even though it wasn't. It was a normal length Dresden book, but it seemed just kind of like this almost piece that needed to be wedged in there in order for changes to have the desired impact.
So it's almost exactly halfway through the series, because he's planning on writing 23 books at last count. 17 are released thus far. So we've got 12, and then Changes was exactly halfway through, but now Ghost Story has reset pretty much everything. I mean, the first sequence of Dresden Files, you had a lot of familiar Dresden things going on. Like, he always back to his apartment. He had the Blue Beetle. He had a lot of the same gear. He had somewhat of the same status. I mean, not to say that he didn't advance onward, but you kind of knew what to expect. And now after Changes, and then Ghost Stories kind of reset everything, and then we kind of go from here. So like you say, it's pretty necessary in terms of where the series is going, because now we have almost a new normal after this one.
Yeah, and I think it did a good job of showing that new normal. So I was happy with that part of it. That doesn't mean it was the most fun to read, you know, especially after Changes.
It's a little slow, right?
It's a little slow, and you never feel like the stakes are that high. Harry's not going to die as a ghost, you know? So,
well, no. There were times. I mean, one time he was contemplating ending it all, and towards the end, they talk about how his soul was there manifesting, and if he was to die too much, he would be completely wiped out. There was a chance that he could have died as a ghost even more.
Well, yeah, I should say that it couldn't have happened. I'm just saying that I don't think any reader realistically believed that Butcher would take time to kill a character that he had just brought back to life.
Yeah, that's fair. And at the same time, you're like, well, he's already dead. So if he dies again, as like, he's already gone. So how bad would it be, really? Maybe that's what you're trying to get at.
But that, like, all the characters were coping with his death, and that's a lot of times what makes death so impactful, right? Is the impact that it has on those around you. So they've already grieved him, or they are in the process of grieving him. So
Yeah, and that's what this one focused on a lot. What the other characters, how they were responding to Harry's death, really strongly with Molly and Murphy as well. I mean, every character came up. Well, not every character, but a lot of them. You know, all of Harry's close friends were involved here.
Right. So I guess, do you want to do the like plot beat? I kind of go through it because I feel like we're kind of talking about certain points of the plot without kind of addressing how we got there.
Yeah, so we tried to do some non-spoilers at the beginning. We'll just kind of go into it now. If you like Phantology books, you can find us online at www.phantologybooks.com, on social media at Phantology Books. Check us out on Patreon. We have a merch. Actually, we have a new merch shop open with some new designs, so you're not going to want to miss that. And please join our Discord and let us know your opinions on Ghost Story, on Dresden, on any other series we've covered. We'd love to have your voice added to the community. And that said, rolling into Ghost Story. So, as we know, Changes left off with the ultimate cliffhanger. Our main man, Harry, had been shot through the chest, and he fell into Lake Michigan. And the last thing we saw was kind of this unknown scene where like a train was coming towards him, and it's like he's dying, but we weren't 100% sure. Maybe, but now we are, because he comes to and he is dead. But he's not in the afterlife. He's in kind of this in-between thing. He calls it Chicago Between, which references some of the other versions of Chicago we've seen, like Chicago Above, Chicago Below in previous. And in this one, this is almost like a purgatory type of thing where he talks with a couple of characters we've seen before. Well, we've seen Carmichael before. We haven't seen Jack Murphy before. This is actually Murphy's father. And these guys tell him that there was an irregularity in his death. The bad guys cheated somehow. We don't know how, but they did, I guess. And Harry needs to go back to real Chicago as a ghost, find out what happened with him. And if he doesn't, then people he loves will be harmed. So, of course, Harry is going to accept this mission. I mean, if he's nothing if not willing to sacrifice himself to help out people that he loves.
Right. So I had some questions about Chicago in between. First, I really like the fact that Carmichael was there. If you remember way back when we were doing the first few books, I was pretty mad that he died the way that he did.
Yeah, you didn't appreciate the Loup Garou mauling of Carmichael?
Right, because at that point he was one of the only like tertiary characters that we cared about. Now there's a few more, but at that point, he wasn't like the main character, Harry.
Yeah.
And he wasn't a main side character like Murphy, but he was definitely like in the orbit.
I think you compared him to Lassiter from Psych, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so I was pretty distraught. So it's cool that he was there. It's also cool that Murphy's dad was there, because these are people that we've been wondering about, or I've been wondering about Jack Murphy a little bit. Kind of, he's had an outsized role in the story for somebody that died a long time ago.
Sure.
So
yeah,
I was happy to see that. I didn't understand. Can you only go to Middle Chicago if there is some type of irregularity in your death? Because we know that kind of happened for Carmichael, right? Like, it's not every day that somebody gets slaughtered by a Loup Garou. And we assume that maybe something happened with Murphy. I mean, it's in the story he committed suicide, but
I don't know. I don't know if being killed by a Loup Garou means that there's an irregularity. In this case, Harry's case, there was an irregularity because a fallen angel directly interfered with his death. And so maybe that more directly breaks the rules of good and evil and free will, which Uriel, the archangel, tells Harry about towards the end of the book. So I don't know. I don't know if this is just a processing place for everyone that dies, and then the vast majority are just sent on, and some are told they have to stick around or they have another mission or something like that. I don't think that's super clear, but at least in Harry's case, we know what's going to happen with him.
Yeah, maybe. I would say I'm pretty sure it's that you don't have to have some type of irregularity, especially because Uriel kind of tries to get, who's that what's the name of the ghost that Harry becomes friend with? In the
Stu?
book. Is it Stu? He's like the general or whatever.
Yeah, Stu.
Okay. Yeah. So Stu, he kind of tries to get Stu to join the team in Middle Chicago at the end of it. So
Uh-huh.
maybe it's just whoever Uriel sees fit to have on his team there. I don't know.
Yeah, and I don't think we get all of the rules of the different, magics and realms. As a reader, sometimes we're just kind of along for the ride.
Yeah.
This is kind of similar to, Platform 9 3/4 when Harry Potter dies at the end of Deathly Hallows, right? I guess major spoilers for Harry Potter.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, yeah. That
There's
was
a lot
kind
of
of a weird
similarities between. Yeah, it was a little strange, but I think very symbolic and impactful in similar ways that this one is.
Yeah.
So Harry gets sent back, and he chooses to go back to Mort's house, Mortimer Lundquist. We've seen him before. He can speak with ghosts, so this is a good idea on Harry's part because he knows he's going to need someone that can understand him as a ghost because he kind of knows how ghosts function. And when he goes back, Mort doesn't want to meet him right away, but he does meet Stu, who you mentioned. Stu's like a colonial revolutionary warrior type dude. He fights with a musket. He's pretty sweet. And Harry immediately gets embroiled in this attack with a bunch of wraiths. And the leaders of the wraiths, which are called lemurs, something like that. Not the monkeys, but the actual, undead spirits that can command these wraiths. Harry realizes he doesn't have any magic, actually, at least initially. And that's going to be bad because there's a lot of enemies, but he is able to kind of hold his own in some hand-to-hand ghost fighting. And he fights off these wraiths along with some help, obviously. And he sees what he calls the gray ghost, and the gray ghost looks a lot like Bob. And that seems a little ominous because we know that Bob is fairly powerful when he is unleashed. And also, Harry learns that 6 months have passed and there's snow in May, so this is a nice setup as we kind of get into the plot here.
Yeah, so I really appreciate Mort's role in this. It's another example of bringing back a character that was fairly present in the first few books and kind of drifted away in the last few.
Right.
Yeah, so I really like that. I also like the fact that this starts to tie in Corpse Taker, who I think was leading this first attack, or at least you find out later was present, right?
Yeah, so you do find out that Corpse Taker is the Grey Ghost, and her and Evil Bob are kind of allied with the Fomor and everything. Yeah. And this is someone we haven't seen in a while, but kind of vanished under mysterious circumstances.
And we've been aware of her because Butcher kind of references Corpse Taker whenever he talks about why am I so bad with names? Whenever he talks about Harry's love interest. Shoot.
Susan?
No, not Susan.
Elaine.
No. The corpse she took Corpse Taker's body, or they switched bodies.
Lucio.
Lucio. There you go. My bad. Man, if a character disappears from a book, I completely forget about them. So yeah, but whenever he introduces Lucio, they talk about the fact that she switched bodies with the Corpse Taker. So in that way, the Corpse Taker's been on our radar.
Right. This is an enemy that's more than just a one-off. A lot of times, Harry defeats the enemy for the book, and then they die or they go away. But this is someone who is more present. There's another enemy from Deadbeat, Cowl, who's always kind of talked about, and Harry speculates and has seen in other books, but we still don't know what's going on there. So
yeah,
at least we get one of them.
That's kind of something that's been over foreshadowed, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would agree. It's almost like at this point, let's just know what this is already, because it's just sitting there, and we want to know. Anyway, we're not going to get that in this book, but Harry eventually does get in to talk to Mort. He fights with him. He's able to kind of jump into his body and control him, empower him with some magic. Eventually, Mort summons some more ghosts, and then he kills the race that are attacking him. Harry convinces Mort to help him out because things really aren't looking great for anyone. And then they all drive over to Murphy's along with Stu. And when Harry gets to Murphy's, Murphy's talking to Childs, which is one of Marcone's men. They're talking about the ragged lady who is Molly. Molly has this new moniker, and it doesn't seem like she is doing well. And she definitely hasn't been the same since Chichen Itza. Murphy also has Mister at her place, which is kind of a fun little cameo. It's nice to see that Murphy is taking care of Harry's cat, and Harry's life is being taken care of, at least the life that he left behind is taken care of by his friends in a lot of different ways. So that's really nice to see. You can see how strong Harry's bonds were with his friends in mortality.
Yeah, this part had the feel of almost like the darker timeline that sometimes TV shows, comic-based TV shows kind of explore.
Okay,
where,
like that Community episode?
Yeah, like the Community episode, or I don't know, like if you're a fan of the Arrowverse, a lot of times they'll, kind of go down a darker timeline, which obviously this is the timeline. It's not a darker timeline or whatever.
Yeah.
So it's real, but at the same time, you're removed from it because you're viewing it from Harry's eyes, who's kind of removed because he's not alive right now. And so, yeah, you kind of see what if Butters was the one to have Bob? You kind of get that, you kind of explore that. Or what if Molly got to be just kind of this, what if she had almost explored her darker side from the get-go? Who would she have wound up to be? And I feel like you kind of get these views into characters had they made different choices from the beginning. Even though this is how it all played out, you still kind of feel like this is removed and will resolve itself without too much trouble.
And it's interesting that you could say this is what would happen if Dresden was removed from everyone's lives, because that's exactly what has happened. But it's also what has happened because of the choices that Harry made. So right. In both ways, he has driven people towards this.
Right. So, yeah, that's interesting because a lot of the time, Harry sees himself like the glue that's holding all these people together, holding Chicago together. But now you find out that he could be that, but he's also has this effect where once that glue disappears, it's in a lot worse condition than maybe it would have been had he not been there in the first place.
And this is something that he explores to pretty great lengths in this book. He talks a lot about, he has a lot of regrets, and he realizes that he probably crossed some lines in changes, especially with Molly. He feels especially bad about the situation that he's put Molly into. But at the same time, it's not like he can necessarily get out of all of these things, right? Like the biggest thing is that he still has this winter night bargain that there's no way he can get out of because he's made this magical pact. But he's also committed to doing better. So it's kind of a trade-off that I feel like is a tough line to walk for Harry and for Butcher. Like, how is he going to rectify both of these ideas that Harry wants to be a better person, and he's always been a really good person when it comes down to it? It's almost like he just needs to blame himself less, is kind of my takeaway.
Yeah, I agree with that. Butcher's done a really good job at making Harry a good person that's made tough choices. And anytime that happens, you're going to have a character that has a lot of depth to them. And so I look forward to exploring this. And yeah. I feel like the reason why Harry's forced to reckon with this, though, is seeing how his choices, because his choices, he's known how it affects him inside, and he's been able to cope with that. But now seeing how it's affected other people, he's having a harder time with coping. So,
yeah, seeing all of them in a lens where he's not directly involved, I think is really impacting him more. So he sees, speaking of friends that he's seeing, a few small-time practitioners arrive at Murphy's place. He calls them the Justice League. So last book we got the Fellowship. This book we have the Justice League. So there's a few alphas. Father Forthill shows up. Daniel Carpenter, who is a character that's getting a larger role here. This is Michael's son. And then there's this random White Knight vampire who arrives on the scene. They kind of discuss the power vacuum that's been left behind after the disappearance of the Red Court, which has now been filled by this group called the Fomor, who is mysterious and nefarious, and we will see more of those. They talk about the swords a little bit. And then Harry comes in, and, well, he doesn't really come in, but his ghost comes in with Mort. He tries to convince them that he is in fact Harry, and they don't believe him for a while until Mister comes and like rubs up against his leg, and then that kind of convinces them. Although by the end of the book, we'll see that they weren't 100% convinced until the very end. So then Molly comes in. We get more of the details of her, that how bad of a place she's been in. The White Council has been staying out of Chicago for the most part, except for Ramirez, and Molly is trying to defend Chicago in the same way that Harry has been. So,
So you talk about them not really believing that he's the ghost, that he's real. And to me, that was interesting because he had an easy time believing that they believed. And as a reader, you're kind of like, well, obviously they should be believing this. But at the end of it, they're like, you really expected us to believe it when all we saw was a cat rubbing up against air and the fact that Mort knew the answers to some tough questions.
right.
Like you really, so that was an interesting contrast where, again, you're so used to seeing this through Harry's eyes as a reader. And it's not that he's an unreliable narrator, but Butcher does a really good job at kind of giving you glimpses of how other characters view the situations in hindsight, and how what you're seeing as a reader and what Harry's seeing isn't really the full picture of what's going on.
Yeah, so you're in Harry's headspace 100%, and his impressions are not always reality for other people.
Right. And he's like, oh, thank goodness they finally believe. And in their heads, they're like, I guess this could be true. So.
Yeah, it really seems like, I don't know, as a reader, you think, like, how could they not believe? I mean, he responds with the Star Wars quote, and Molly sees him with her wizard sight. It seems like they should have all been on the same page. But maybe it's a case where, they don't want to believe, because if they do believe, that makes it all real, and that, kind of helps suspend the belief a bit.
Yeah.
So the plot picks up here as gunmen start firing on Murphy's house, and then Stu teaches Harry some new ghost fighting techniques so they can teleport around, kind of like Nightcrawler, and they go and mess with the truck that's firing on Murphy's house. Harry follows it and meets up with this kid named Fitz, who he connects with right away because he's also an orphan, similar to Harry's upbringing, and so Harry tries to help out Fitz and these other young kids who are being manipulated by this sorcerer, this kind of mid-level sorcerer named Aristides. Probably mispronounced that. But this plot, not super essential, but I think what it does is it just kind of brings out the emotion of Harry's upbringing a little bit more and shows you just the fact that all of these mid-level guys are starting to fill this power vacuum, and Chicago is kind of up for grabs, and there's all these groups that are operating in the chaos, probably not needed in the book, to be honest. But I don't know. Did you care for it?
I mean, to me, this felt like a lot like one of the earlier Dresden books, where you had the main plot that you're interested in, and then you had this kind of side plot. But I actually thought the earlier Dresden books did a good job of connecting those two plot lines and showing how they kind of mingle together a little bit more than you might have expected. Whereas this, it was more independent and, like you say, not really needed. And I don't know, to me, it felt like Harry was trying to say, kind of comment on the nature of gangs in Chicago, which was kind of weird to me. I don't know. Maybe especially in today's political climate, it's like, okay, this is kind of weird, especially when you're doing it with these characters that are clearly not like gang members. I don't know. That was a little weird to me.
Yeah, the connection with Fitz is nice, but at the same time, he's more of a one-off character that doesn't really have the depth of some other characters, so didn't necessarily seem 100% necessary, but it is what it is. So after this interaction, it's dawn, and of course, ghosts cannot operate in the daytime, so Harry has to get to safety. So he goes to his grave, which conveniently exists in Graceland Cemetery. It's been there for several books now. And then he has this real deep reflection on the events of changes, how he crossed the line. We kind of talked about this a bit already. After this happens, the next night, he realizes that the gates of Graceland Cemetery have been left open, which is why all the wraiths are escaping, and it's really kind of pushing Chicago, into chaos, especially in the ghost world, and then he heads back to Mort's house, which has been burned down by another attack between ghosts and human allies. And Mort has been taken. Stu is barely alive. Harry gets his ghost gun that he was using, like the ectoplasm gun. So this is the start of Harry kind of getting some of his powers back. And he uses it right away to fight some of these lemur ghosts. And then he's saved, fortunately, by Butters and Bob, who take him to the new headquarters of the Chicago Alliance, which is led by Marcone. So we've got some characters in different places here.
Yeah. So one thing that you kind of glanced over with Harry's grave, and I'm forgetting the character's name, but there's kind of this young girl that was kind of almost standing guard there.
Are you talking about Inez? Inez is like the in Chicago lore, she is a ghost that exists in Graceland Cemetery.
Right. To me, if we're making Harry Potter connections, that character felt a lot like Moaning Myrtle.
Okay.
Maybe with a bit more serious than Moaning Myrtle, but again, it was kind of this young girl that has been hanging out here and kind of gives a character an insight to ghosts that you didn't have before and kind of a stronger personality. So I like that. But again, it felt a lot like Moaning Myrtle. I don't know if anybody else got that impression as well.
Okay. The Harry Potter connections continue. So what do you think of Butters' new role here and Marcone's new role?
Well, Marcone was interesting because he was present without being present, which is always kind of, I feel like that's how Marcone's been the past couple books. And so he could be doing something big right now with his absence.
Well, he set up this new Chicago Alliance, the Brighter Future Society, and he built this fortress on top of Harry's old boarding house. Very ironic, right? As soon as it burns down, Marcone's there ready to move in.
It almost seems, Marcone is cool because he's part of the Unseelie Accords now. And so he's throwing his weight around a little bit. And he almost does things because he's like, this is probably how it works in the wizarding world. Like, surely if I build something on top of a powerful wizard's home, then that should give me extra power. You might not have any basis to believe that, but it could make sense. So he's just going to do it.
Well, we know he's got some allies in the know, right? He's allied with Odin, and he hires the soldiers of Valhalla, I'm going to pronounce this wrong, Inherjaren? Oh gosh, that was bad. Anyway, someone correct me there. But he's got plenty of allies.
Right. Yeah, that's true. And so, yeah, it's cool to see him throwing his weight around. It's also interesting to see that Murphy has decided to play ball with him because before I feel like characters could maintain their distance. Characters like Murphy could maintain their distance and almost their moral superiority because they had Harry there to do the heavy lifting for them.
Sure. Yeah.
So now that Harry's not there, Murphy's like, well, do I do this myself or do I not do it myself? And so it seems like she's deciding that she's going to have to, kind of do the dirty work now.
Right. It's like if you work for a big company and you're towards the bottom, you've got your manager and his manager or her manager or whatever, and there are layers of protection from the big bad boss at the top. But when Dresden leaves or the managers leave, there's no protection. So you've got to make some deals with people who you otherwise wouldn't.
Right.
That's my analogy to corporate life.
Yeah, apparently you've been spending a lot of time in corporate America because I would have never thought about that.
Yeah, unfortunately. So there's more speculation on Molly. There's been a lot of bodies that have been found around Chicago with scraps of clothing that match what Harry was wearing to Chichen Itza. And they talk about how the gray ghost might actually be evil Bob, the part of Bob that was cut off of Bob from back in Deadbeat, I believe. Harry tracks Molly and finds her fighting some of the Fomor they call turtlenecks because they're humans that have been altered and they have gills. The Fomor are like ancient enemies of the Fae that have now resurfaced in this new power vacuum with the Red Court being gone. So I don't know, like, what's your impression on the Fomor thus far, Ben? How serious of a threat are they?
I mean, to me, they almost seem like cannon fodder for Molly and her newfound powers. Not
Okay.
serious, not too serious.
So, okay, interesting. I guess we'll see. But yeah, we'll see what you think going forward on
Yeah.
that one. I mean, I agree. Thus far, it's really pretty nebulous as to what the new enemies are going to be and what the larger plot is. This is more about Harry and friends moving forward in Ghost Story. At least Molly's being taught by Leah pretty roughly. She's being really, trial by fire type tutorial here. And after this fight happens, Molly's using her illusory magic to best them. After this happens, Harry sits down with Molly, kind of speaks with them through a tuning fork and wizard sight. And Molly admits that she has been putting on this crazy act in order to protect Chicago in Harry's absence. And she has, in fact, been killing the Fomor servitors, which are the altered humans. And this really breaks Harry to the point where he is considering ending it all near some running water, just like letting his soul wash away and being done with it because he can't handle it. But eventually he gets a hold of himself and decides it's time to protect the city. No more of this chaos. I'm gonna get back in the game. So good, but how are you gonna do that, Harry? Like, that's easier said than done.
Right. And I think you also kind of get the impression that Molly might be putting on some type of act, but really there's a lot, there's a pretty deep seated craziness to her that is real.
She's been damaged pretty hard here, and we don't know exactly why. There's a big piece of information that's going to come towards the climax that really kind of hints at the level of her emotional baggage here.
Yeah. And so one question I had, didn't Harry's clothes disappear? I thought that his outfit that he wore to Chichen Itza was supposed to disappear after 24 hours.
Because the whole fairy godmother thing where she was going to deck him out and changes. But that's a good question. I wonder if anyone knows and can let us know what happened there on Discord. But yeah, she did say that all that gear was going to vanish.
Yeah, well, maybe it was just like the armor that he had, and maybe the clothes underneath. I don't know. That seems strange. So
okay, sure, yeah, we'll look into that. I mean, I'm guessing that's an obvious enough plot hole where there probably is an explanation, but curious. Yeah. I agree. One thing I do want to mention is this is another moment where we use running water to dispel magic, and I know that in Turncoat, in Small Favor, you were kind of questioning the running water in Union Station and that whole fight. So here it is again. So
I guess
Butcher does follow his rules.
I thought about it a bit after that because I kind of got reprimanded on Discord.
Yeah.
And the thing is, I agree that it's a thing, but if water is such a big weapon that can be used to, like, why doesn't Harry just carry around a water gun? It seems like if water is really such a big powerhouse and can pack such a big punch, that it should be used a lot more throughout the book.
Well, come on, he used to carry around holy water balloons in the Blue Beetle.
Yeah, that was pretty sweet. Yeah, so but
I don't know. He's not a waterbender. He's more on the Fuego side of things.
Yeah, definitely Fuego.
And there's some, I'm assuming there are some types of magic that are going to be more effective depending on what you're fighting, such as holy water on vampires, etc. I doubt water dispels everything. And like we said earlier, we don't know all the rules of the Dresden verse. We just kind of have to trust Butcher sometimes and go along with it.
Yeah, I agree. So, yeah.
So Harry gets more info about this new gang that's wearing hoods from Fitz, his young friend, and he sends him back to Father Forthill to get some protection. Harry goes and finds the Grey Ghost place. He finds Mort there, learns that the Grey Ghost is actually Corpse Taker. She's trying to take over Mort's body, but she needs him to be willing, so she is torturing him. And then she hears her and Evil Bob make a deal with the Fomor. The Fomor's agent name is Listen. This is an important character Going forward, they make a deal to take out Molly, and then the sun is rising again, so Harry goes back to his grave. So now he's got the seeds of a plan. So after his emotional moment where he was considering suicide, he immediately gets a plan together. We're going to reset the next day, and he is going to come back with a vengeance.
Yeah, so to me, this was cool because I think that Mort has he never really needed a redemption arc, but you kind of thought that he was kind of a loser. But at this point, you're like, Mort's really powered up in your estimation here, right? Because he's holding out against torture. He's,
he's never been someone we like all that much. Like, he's an ally of Dresden's to an extent, but not a friend.
Right. No, he's just kind of there, but now you realize that again, Harry might have had just this weird assumption about him that might not have been true, and that he didn't really care to correct about it. Like, he didn't care enough about Mort years before, he didn't care enough about Mort to really figure out if this guy was good or not. He just kind of accepted that he was probably a loser because that was just a first impression. And so again, we're kind of, and Harry's realizing this about himself, that he might not give people enough credit, or might not give them the benefit of the doubt enough. So that's a cool kind of character progression thing for Harry.
Yeah, again, like we were saying, Harry's ability to see people now from another lens when he's not directly involved is pretty powerful for him. So we'll see how this changes Harry going forward. This day or night, whatever, in the intervening time here, after Harry goes back to his grave, he meets with Leah, his fairy godmother, and they revisit his memory of He Who Walks Behind, which is an outsider encounter from when he was younger with Justin. And this is going to be important going forward. We've heard about outsiders a little bit previously, but we get more of an in-depth walkthrough of what's going on here. Not sure if you really got then the full not sure if you totally understood the importance here quite yet, but I think it is something interesting to throw in at this point.
Well, okay, so they hinted at a few things. First, they hinted at the fact that He Who Walks Behind might have been preparing Harry and not just wanting to kill him. Like, might have been wanting to make him stronger.
Right.
So that was interesting. And I think I made this point, though, kind of talking about the scene overall in a previous podcast, that Harry's relationship with his mentor I think I would have preferred it had it been left up to the imagination a little bit more, because I feel like now that we have these actual events that we can kind of had explained to us in detail, I think it kind of, to me, it didn't live up to the hype that I had built it up in my own imagination. So I kind of wish that we could do without. We could have still gotten some He Who Walks Behind scene without exploring Harry's relationship with why am I forgetting his name?
With Justin?
With Justin, yeah.
Yeah, I think it is. I see what you're saying there, but this is going to be important for plot reasons going forward, so it probably was needed. Leah fills in some of the gaps with Corpse Taker and the Fomor. Going forward, we kind of already talked about that. He asked her for some details around who killed him, and she cannot give him a straight answer, which is interesting. But she does tell him that it was someone that Harry knows and that they'd killed thousands before, but here the killing was through proxy. So one thing about this book, and this is probably going to be my worst of the best, which maybe we'll just start now, was interesting that one thing that really drove the plot along was this idea that Harry's got to find his killer, but he spends hardly any time actually looking for his killer.
Mm. Yeah, that is kind of interesting. Yeah.
But maybe that's just because he gets distracted with a bunch of emotional baggage, and it fortunately works out for him. So going forward, he meets up with Fitz and Butters, who need help with Father Forthill, who's been taken captive. Harry travels in Bob's skull, which is kind of fun because Bob appears as a human, and the skull is all decked out like an apartment building. They kind of speculate on a few of these things that we've talked about before. This is almost similar to when he talks to Mouse in Changes. Now you see a character that's not human, but has a appearance that is a little more fun to see all of a sudden.
Yeah, I agree. I really liked Bob's role in this. One thing going back a little bit, when we found out that Bob had kind of cut off the evil part of him, that felt a little forced to me. It seemed like Harry would have known that before. I mean, he gives Bob the command never to access that part of himself again. And it seemed like I don't know. It seemed a little forced to me. What did you think about that?
No,
Learning
but
that Bob had...
we knew that Bob would cut off the evil part of him. We just didn't know where that part went.
Oh, really? I didn't know. I thought it was a surprise to Harry that Bob had cut off the evil part of him as well in this book.
My recollection was this is kind of like a Ultron thing. I've been rewatching the Marvel movies, so Jarvis Ultron thing, and we're cutting off the Ultron part and sending him away somewhere, and so he appears in the spirit world.
I agree that it works. I just think it could have, when Harry gave Bob the command at the first part, it would have been cool to see Bob do that, and then Harry be like, "Well, where did that go?" And Bob was like, "That's not important," or something like that. Like some type of foreshadowing. It would have been an easy win to kind of connect it back here. So I don't know. To me, it seemed a little forced, but I did like sitting inside Bob's skull. That was super fun.
So after this, they kind of all fight. They rescue Fort Hill, and everyone's going to go to the ambulance and get patched up. This is not a real important part of the plot, to be honest. Then Harry asks for help from everyone going after Corpse Taker, and the crew is going to organize here. Harry forms a staff from the gun. He enlists Morty's leftover spirits, and Molly and him go through the Never Never to get to Corpse Taker's lair. He ends up storming the beach on D-Day, like the opening scene of Saving Private Ryan. Faces off with evil Bob, who is a Nazi. Real Bob helps to neutralize him, and he makes it to Corpse Taker. This was a fun scene, another pop culture reference like Butcher likes to throw in, and I think it works here, especially making evil Bob a Nazi.
Yeah, again, this kind of also goes back to the evil or the darker timeline type situation, because the common theme in that is, what if the Nazis had won? So you kind of feel you kind of bring that feel to it, so which is fun.
Yeah, kind of like that Amazon show, Man in the High Tower, I think.
Man in the High Tower, yeah. But again, that, if you're like a fan of comic book TV shows, they do that often enough.
Okay.
I think they do that in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. They do that in the Arrowverse for a few episodes. They do it. I mean,
yeah.
So, yeah.
So now we get into the climax, and the big fight happens. Corpse Taker consumes a bunch of ghosts, can now form a physical shell. Everyone fights back and forth. Corpse Taker takes over Butter's body and kills the physical form that Harry has created. Molly saves Butters, and Corpse Taker jumps into Molly's body, and Harry's along for the ride. So now this fight enters into Molly's consciousness and gets pretty meta. This is another fun pop culture reference, as inside Molly's mind, there's a crew of different Mollys all on a Star Trek Enterprise bridge type of thing, and they're all controlling. It's almost like Inside Out a little bit, especially with all the emotions involved. And Harry discovers there is a secret stashed away in Molly's mind, and this is the big reveal of the book. So I know after Changes, you were thinking that it was in fact Kincaid that killed Harry, but
right.
Did you know that before you read Ghost Story? That was a legitimate theory?
Oh yeah, like right after I got done reading Changes, I called Josh. And was like, it was obviously Kincaid that did this. And then Josh's response was
to verify this.
Well, yeah, no, Josh's response was as well. He's like, he kind of didn't have the best poker face. He was like, well, it was more about why Harry was killed than who actually killed him. I'm like, okay, so I was right. I kind of thought it was Kincaid all through the book. So. Yeah,
Josh is right though. It's more about why Harry was killed. So he sacrificed himself, but in doing so, he really put Molly in a bad situation because Molly is feeling this weight of having been the one to kill Molly, pretty much.
You kill Harry, right? Yeah, that really does explain why Molly had such a hard time with things. And again, it's so cool because Harry thinks this is all my fault because of what I did in Chichen Itza. Obviously that was what pushed Molly over the edge, which it probably didn't help, but really it was about what Harry asked her to do with his death that pushed her over the edge. So like all this time, Harry's blaming himself, which he probably should be, but not for the reasons why he thinks. So it kind of shows his mindset, like he's just looking for a reason to blame himself for these characters' situation. So
yeah, fantasy book heroes are nothing if not self-deprecating and gloomy. Kaladin, Jon Snow, Harry Dresden. It's a trope.
You just put him in some good company there, Steven.
Yeah, those are some powerhouses. So going forward, Harry meets with Uriel in this featureless expanse, and he now has the choice if he wants to continue on or if he wants to actually die. Harry says, well, maybe I do, but I also want to see if my friends are going to be okay. And Uriel kind of takes him through kind of a la Christmas Carol, like we're seeing how it's going to work out for everyone. He sees Molly and Mort defeats Corpse Taker. Mort confirms Harry's death to Murphy. Finally, she breaks down. He sees Thomas and Justine kind of hanging in there, not doing great, but hanging in there. He feels bad because he hasn't thought about Thomas at all. Thomas is not a part of this one. And then finally, he sees Mouse and Maggie safe at the Carpenters, which is really nice to see. I mean, he's been worried about Maggie this whole time, and the Carpenters have taken them in. It's great to see, Mouse is now Maggie's companion and guardian. I think that's really tender. And Harry says, okay, I'm ready to move on. Looks like things are going to be okay. And he tells Uriel, let's do it. Let's go ahead and go forward. So seems like you never really think that Harry's going to actually move on. But at the same time, it's like, okay, well, everything is wrapped up here.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, you really have to just consider that the resolution to the book and not put too much more stock into it apart from that, because obviously the next scene is Harry getting ready to come back under these weird circumstances. Okay, sorry, going back to his kind of view of Thomas, that was weird to me. The fact that like for some reason he didn't want to think about Thomas throughout all of it, that was weird. It was also weird that he almost had this voyeuristic look into Thomas and what's her name? Justine, like hooking up. That was a weird scene, totally not necessary, but this is Dresden, so I guess one of those scenes is almost mandatory.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something that defines Thomas, so we do need to know how he's going to be able to deal with his hunger. Seems like he will be able to, but he's not doing super great, but well enough, I guess, for Harry. I wish maybe Thomas was... the Fitz thing had been replaced with Thomas, would have maybe wrapped things up a little more, made it more compact.
Yeah, I like that.
So the only loose end still that exists, I mean, there's lots of loose ends in the series still, but the big one from this is the fact that Uriel's been saying that things are unbalanced and there's an irregularity, and we still don't know what that is, and now we're going to learn. Well, actually, we know what the irregularity is. We know that the fallen angel whispered to Harry in his real moment of crisis before he killed himself, or before he scheduled Kincaid to kill him, and that messed with Harry's ability to have free will. And so Uriel is going to balance the scales here when Harry wakes up to Mab in Demon Reach. There are vines growing through his body, keeping him alive. Mab is there saying that, Harry, you're not getting out of this that easily. You are still my Winter Knight, and we have a bargain here. And yes, you are still alive, and I will be controlling you, and you have no ability, like you are my pawn. And Uriel balances the scales by whispering to Harry that no, Mab cannot control you, you have free will. Harry stands up to her, and she backs off a little bit, but still says, okay, get ready to go to court, because even if you think that you have some power here, we'll see how this is going to go. So nice setup into the rest of the series. Harry's alive, Winter Knight, he's going to have to deal with this.
Yeah. So that was kind of a weird scene, kind of nebulous. You don't really know how it's doing, and you just kind of tack up to the fact that these people are really powerful and they can kind of do whatever they want.
And the Demon Reach connection is very important.
And the Demon Reach connection. Yeah, because apparently so that was that was okay. There needs to be some type of way that Harry came back to life, and that seems like it was as good as any.
Yeah.
So,
all right, so that's a wrap for Ghost Story. Do
well,
you have
wait.
worst of the best? Or
Yeah, I got a few worst of the best here.
All right, let's hear it.
Worst of the best number one was the situations around Harry's death. I really like the fact that Molly was as involved as she was. That was the best part. I didn't like how it was Kincaid that did it. It seemed very obvious to me, at least. Also, I'm just going to say that it should have been obvious that, like, because Harry talked about suicide when he was becoming the Winter Knight, and they had a long discussion about how he couldn't commit suicide. And so it was clear that death was an option that he was considering here.
Okay.
So that was kind of the worst of it to me. It was like the fact that there wasn't much mystery in as to like why he did it or anything. It was just to avoid being the Winter Knight. So and that obviously doesn't work out too well. Yeah, I don't know. So that's my worst of the best.
Okay. I mean, I guess I would say that's okay that it's foreshadowed. I mean, he's talked about this danger of the mantle of the Winter Knight, and it really sets up how serious it is.
Yeah. That's
the fact
true.
That he's willing to kill himself.
That's true. I agree with that. It was such a cool reveal, but I feel like it could have packed more of a punch somehow. I don't know. And so, okay, so I have another worst of the best here.
Okay.
So, sorry. So my other worst of the best was the fallen angel's influence on him, and how that was almost. I mean, that was a cool concept that the fallen angel interfered with the free will so much, and that was what was the weird circumstances behind his death. But
yeah.
And so I like that concept. I just don't think that's powerful enough to justify Harry still being alive. Like, that was the thing that kept him alive. It seemed kind of forced to me.
I am with you on that one. That's what I've been thinking about as well. So thanks for bringing it up, because aren't we, like, immortality always kind of subject to temptations from the forces of evil? I mean, depending on what your belief system is, you may have different approaches to this idea, but as humans, we always have evil thoughts running through our minds, right?
Right. And especially, like, because wasn't the thought like it's all your fault or something, like, kind of that Harry would think anyways? Like, Harry's all about the self-blame, you know?
Right.
So I don't know. It was a cool concept, and I'm glad it was explored a little bit, but it wasn't enough of a thing to justify Harry getting a second chance.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I'm with you there. I think that maybe was a little nebulous. So, okay, that's a wrap.
Cool.
On to Cold Days, and we're almost there. We're almost through Dresden. So thanks, Ben. If you like Phantology, we're online at www.phantologybooks.com, at Phantologybooks on social media. Check out Patreon, check out Discord, hop on our chat and let us know what you like, what you don't like. And I will, I guess we will catch you next time. Thanks, Ben. See you later.
Awesome. See you soon.